For most of my life, there was a committee meeting in my head, and they had an opinion on everything. This is the story of how, after 70 years, I finally told them all to shut up. That committee, it was relentless. It was the voice that made me host family holidays I didn't want, because that's what a good son or brother was supposed to do. It was the voice that made me nod silently in conversations where I disagreed with every word, just to keep things smooth. I was a human bridge, a professional people pleaser. My whole job, at work and in life, was keeping everyone else happy. I even bought a sensible beige car when what I really wanted was something with a little bit of flair. Why? Because the committee had a vote, and my vote barely counted. The worst part? I knew it was ridiculous. I'm a grown man. I've raised a family. Rationally, I knew that a stranger's opinion on my shirt or my cousin's thoughts on my garden were completely irrelevant. But that logical knowledge never touched the real problem. It was a deep, wired-in fear of disapproval, a fear of being judged or disliked or just getting it wrong. I was exhausted from running my own life through a filter of what they might think. And I figured that's just how it would always be. The breaking point wasn't some dramatic movie-like event. It was small, almost ridiculous. I was at my grandson's school play. He was 8 years old and he was playing the part of a rock. Seriously, a rock. He had no lines. His entire job was to sit perfectly still on a stage decorated with what were clearly cardboard trees. And he was magnificent, just a perfect, still little rock. And I was sitting there in this folding chair, feeling this wave of pure, simple pride. And then the two parents next to me started whispering, snickering about how shoddy the sets were, how the costumes looked like they were held together with staples. And this familiar, hot feeling washed over me. Shame. But it wasn't even my shame. It was secondhand embarrassment for the school, for the teachers, for my grandson, the rock. And in that moment, something just clicked. It was so clear. Here were two people I would never see again, two complete strangers. And I was allowing their meaningless, petty judgment to poison one of the purest moments of joy I'd felt in months. I was more worried about their opinion of the play than I was present in the reality of my grandson's perfect performance. He was more solid in his role as a rock than I was in my own life. And I realized this is a trap so many of us fall into. You spend your middle years on this hamster wheel of achievement and comparison, always looking over your shoulder. I read something a while back, some research about a U-shaped curve of happiness. It said that people are often happiest in their youth. Then it dips way down in middle age when all the pressure is on, and it's supposed to come back up as you get older. But they don't tell you it comes back up automatically. You have to climb. You have to decide to get off that hamster wheel. Because if you spend your whole life worried about the judgment of the people whispering in the audience, you miss the whole show. And if you're feeling that way right now, I promise you, it's not a personal failure. It's just the price of admission for being a human in a very noisy world. That moment in the school auditorium, it wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the real work. Because realizing you're stuck is one thing. Figuring out how to get unstuck is something else entirely. It didn't happen overnight. For months, I stumbled around. I tried to just will myself to not care. That was a spectacular failure. It's like trying not to think about a purple elephant. But slowly, piece by piece, I started figuring out a few things that actually moved the needle. A few small, concrete actions that began to lower the volume on that committee in my head. And that's what I want to share with you now. This isn't a magic formula. It's just a map of the road I traveled. The few key discoveries that took me from being constantly exhausted by the opinions of others to a place that feels finally like peace. It's strange when a single quiet moment can change you more than years of trying. For me, it all comes back to that school auditorium, to my grandson on that stage. Looking back, the real point of ignition wasn't the whispering from those strangers. It wasn't even that familiar hot feeling of secondhand shame. The real turning point, the hinge on which the rest of my life would swing, was the image of that little boy. He was completely, utterly content in his job of being a rock. He wasn't trying to be a better rock than the other kids. He wasn't wishing he had lines. He was just a rock, solid, present. And in that flash of clarity, I saw the truth. My 8-year-old grandson, in his cardboard costume, was more real in that moment than I had been in decades. All my people-pleasing, all the managing of opinions, all the frantic work of that committee in my head. It was just noise. My grandson was silent, and he was powerful. That's when I understood, really understood, for the first time. The goal wasn't to win the argument with the committee. The goal was to become the rock, to be so grounded in my own small patch of earth, so solid in my own reality, that the noise of their judgment just becomes what it is, wind, and wind can't move a rock. So, becoming the rock. That sounded great. But how? You can't just decide to be a rock. For months I stumbled. I'd tell myself, today I just won't care, which of course is a fantastic way to spend the entire day, caring about the fact that you're caring. It was a mess. But slowly, by trying and failing, a few things started to actually work. The first real step was to stop fighting with a fog. I had to give the voices in my head a job title. I started calling them, seriously, the committee, and once I gave them a name, I could see them for what they were. I remember when I was trying to decide whether to sell my family home. It was just too big. But the committee went into emergency session. The ghost of my mother was there, arguing I was betraying her memory. The voice of my successful neighbor sat on the finance subcommittee, insisting that downsizing was a public admission of failure. The apparition of my children's youth was there, tearfully accusing me of selling their childhood. I was completely paralyzed, stuck in my living room arguing with ghosts about a house I wasn't even enjoying anymore. And look, if you spend your time defending your choices to people who aren't even in the room, you're not going crazy. You're just holding a meeting with your own, very normal, internal committee. I learned later there's a fancy term for this, the generalized other. It's the voice of society's expectations that we swallow and mistake for our own. But once you've identified these voices, how do you get them to leave the room? For years, I believed that one day a switch would just flip, maybe on my 70th birthday. I'd wake up and magically be one of those wise old men who just doesn't give a damn. Well, I woke up on my 70th birthday and the committee was already in session, debating my choice of breakfast cereal. The feeling never just arrives. That was the big lie. The real change wasn't the lightning bolt of revelation. It was that quiet click in the school auditorium. The realization that I had to do something, not wait to feel something. The feeling of freedom didn't come first. The actions came first. There's a writer, James Clear, who talks about this. He says every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. You don't just decide you're a person who isn't afraid of judgment. You perform one small action of such a person, and then another. You cast a vote. And if you've been waiting for years to feel brave before you do the thing, and that feeling has never shown up, you're not broken. You've just been given the wrong instructions. Freedom isn't an inheritance, it's a daily practice. So if it's a practice, what's the first, most basic exercise? I called it my disapproval diet. The goal was to starve the fear by feeding myself tiny, authentic acts. One of my first assignments was to go to the hardware store and ask a stupid question. The committee insisted a man my age should know these things. My heart was pounding a little, but I walked up to this young employee and said, I have no idea what this thing is called, but I need to hang a picture. And you know what? He didn't laugh. He didn't call his manager. He spent 10 minutes showing me different kinds of wall anchors. The catastrophe in my head was a raging inferno. The reality was a perfectly pleasant, helpful human being. I was basically using a technique therapists call exposure therapy. You confront your fear in small, controlled doses, and you teach your brain that the world doesn't actually explode. Your first authentic act, saying no to a small favor, wearing a shirt you love, admitting you don't know something, it might feel disproportionately terrifying. And the size of that fear is just a measure of how important the work is. But this diet has an interesting side effect. It doesn't just change you, it changes the people around you. I had this long-standing weekly coffee date with a former colleague, and I realized our whole friendship was basically a performance. We'd complain about our old jobs and subtly try to one-up each other about our retirements. The first time I started talking about my pottery class, not as an achievement, but about the simple, messy joy of it, he just stared at me. He had nothing to add. And pretty soon those coffee dates just faded away. But then a woman from that pottery class, who only knew me as the guy who couldn't center his clay to save his life, she invited me to a local art fair. That is now a real friendship. My authentic self repelled a performer and attracted a compatriot. The writer Brené Brown talks about this. She says, fitting in is being what others want you to be, but belonging is being who you are. And as you become more yourself, you may find some relationships fall away. It can hurt. It can feel like rejection. But it is not a rejection of you. It's a rejection of the role you used to play. You are not losing people. You are losing your audience. And when you lose the audience, you're finally left with the one thing you were looking for all along: peace. Last Tuesday, I was sitting on my porch for about an hour, doing absolutely nothing. A few years ago, that kind of stillness would have been filled with this anxious, buzzing static. I should be doing something productive. Is this all there is? Why hasn't anyone called? But this time it was just quiet. And it wasn't an empty silence. It was a full silence. It was filled with my own presence, unburdened by the need to be anything for anyone. That feeling, I realized, is the peace. And for those of us who have spent a lifetime being busy and being needed, peace can feel unnerving at first. It can feel like irrelevance. Just know that this is a withdrawal symptom from a lifelong addiction to external validation. It passes. So that's the road I've been on. And it would be easy to wrap this up with a neat little bow and tell you I'm cured, that the committee has been permanently disbanded, and I've achieved some kind of enlightened, guru-like state of not caring. But that's not the truth. The truth is much more human, and I think much more useful. The committee, they're still there, but I've put them on a permanent, unpaid leave of absence. I still hear them sometimes. A murmur of dissent from the back of the room when I'm trying something new or making a choice that feels a little bold. The old fear still shows up, like a ghost you occasionally see out of the corner of your eye. The difference is I don't argue with it anymore. I don't try to fight it. I just see it for what it is, an echo, not an authority. What's really changed deep down is the default question in my head. For 70 years, the automatic first question was always, what will they think? Now, most of the time, it's something much quieter. A simple, what do I want? And sometimes the answer is to sit on the porch. Sometimes it's to make a mess with clay. Sometimes it's to say no to something and yes to something else. This place, it's not a destination. It's just a different way of walking. I haven't gotten rid of all my anxieties. I've just stopped letting them be the map. And I know my path is just that, my path. Your committee might have different members. Your disapproval diet might have different foods. But the one thing I know for sure is that the journey starts. It doesn't just happen. And wherever you are on that road, you're not behind. You're just right where you are. And that's a perfectly good place to start. When I started this story, I told you that for most of my life there was a committee meeting in my head. This was the story of how, after 70 years, I finally told them to shut up. But the real secret, the thing I learned at the end of it all, is that you never really tell them to shut up. You just stop going to the meetings. You stop giving them your vote. You just get so busy living your own life that their noise becomes distant, like music from a car passing on a street far away. I think back to my grandson on that stage, the little rock. My goal was to become the rock, to be so solid in my own life that the wind of other people's opinions just blows right past. And what I've learned is that I'm not a rock, not completely. I'm still human. But I'm no longer a leaf, tossed around by every little breeze. I'm just heavier now, more grounded. My roots are a little deeper in my own soil. And maybe that's all the peace we can ever really ask for. Not to become invulnerable, but to just feel the satisfying weight of our own life holding us in place. Your final chapters are not for earning the world's approval. They are for finally spending the self-worth you've been accumulating all along. I would love to know if any of this feels true to you. Tell me in the comments. What is one small vote your internal committee has cast this week? You don't have to have defied it. Just noticing it is the first step. And if this kind of conversation is one you'd like to have more of, I hope you'll stick around. There's a lot more to talk about.